Oh, you're on TV. Hi. I don't know if anybody else is here, but I want to be able to show my work surface. Okay, so here was what I was going to work from as a demo. I thought I would make an image of this shell. So I could work from a drawing. You could go ahead and do it old school, draw the whole thing out yourself. You could work from your own idea, from your own sketch. But sometimes people get real nervous about whether they draw well or not. So you could do that. I took a digital photograph, printed it out, and I can use that to kind of help guide me. So I'm not opposed to this approach at all. Like if you're ever at a point where you're like, I'm not really sure, I don't feel comfortable with the drawing, or if you want to work from a photo reference, don't feel like you can't. That's absolutely an acceptable thing to do. The material that we're working on is your plexiglass, and here's one that has already got a Drypoint image on it. It's hard to see that, I'm sure. I'm gonna drop the lights so y'all can see the screen better. Come on. Play along. Zoom in closer, and I can play with the lights. All right. If I put something dark underneath that, you may be able to see the lines a little better, and you can't, of course. So that's great. All right, never fear. We will solve this. Okay, there's a nice clean piece of plexiglass with no marks on it. I think you can kind of see that. So I can place that directly over my photograph if that's what I'm working from, or a drawing if that's what I'm working from. And make sure I get in the screen. And then here is your super sophisticated tool. This is your Drypoint needle. There's not much to it. It is a cylinder that comes to a really, really sharp point. So if I was going to work from this image on this piece, if I was going to make a Drypoint print of this image, I would probably want to tape it in place so it doesn't move around on me. I always keep lots of different types of tape right here in this black bag. This kind of jump bag has tape, glue, pencils, pens, pretty much anything you're looking for in a quick rush to grab hold of a supply will be in there. Get my fingernails back. Come on. You want to do that, right? Because, oh, there we go. Oh. There we go. Now it's facing the right way for me and for you. It would be nice if you focused, that wouldn't it? That may be the best we got for the moment. But the tool that I'm using, the Drypoint needle, is really pretty basic. It doesn't do anything that is super sophisticated or requires a lot of training to use. It's one of the reasons I like to start with it. But wherever you scratch with it is where a line is going to be formed, and that's where the ink is going to hold. So it's possible that you will hear an irritating sound. I can go in either direction. But you notice I'm not holding the tool straight up and down. I'm holding it on an angle. And I'm following my major contours and outlines right now. I'm not too worried about hatching and cross-hatching at this point. Just want to get the lines established. Now, to check progress, I can put it against something darker. So you notice I attached the drawing so I could flip it out. If I put it against a darker ground, can you kind of see my white lines there on screen at all? Of course not. You can kind of see a reflection of them right in there. If you were looking at this in person, up close, it's really easy to see. The video's not picking it up, but right, it's actually not hard to see it. So I have a bunch of pieces of black mapboard that you can put underneath to double check. So it doesn't show well on the video, big surprise. But once you've established those basic things, the main outlines, you can go in and start dealing with adding in some contours. And you can do repeated marks close together to create the values. This area has a pretty dark shadow in my original image. So I'm putting a lot of marks in that space. Areas that are going to be white, I'm going to leave alone. Areas that have cast shadow, like this is, that area is a hole through the shell and there's actually a cast shadow on the table underneath it. I can add that in. But essentially everywhere that I scratch the surface is making a line that ink is going to stick to. So it is a little tedious in that fact that it's going to take you some time to build up enough marks to show all the details, the highlights, and the shadows that you want. But essentially, it is hatching, cross-hatching, outline, and contour. And as long as you're holding your tool the right way, instead of holding it straight up and down, make sure you're holding it at an angle. When you're holding the tool at an angle, it's going to do something like kind of scratch into the surface, but it also kicks up part of the material to the side of the line you just drew. And that little bit that's sticking up helps hold the ink. We call that the burr. And so that area is important in making this actually fulfill its possibilities, to make it look the right way. So I can continue working on this, and I probably will over the rest of today and into Wednesday, so you can see this one actually start to finish. But I'm going to go ahead and show you what we do once the image is ready to go, so we can actually see how this process is going to work with the printing press. So I'm going to put a piece of newsprint down on my work table. And maybe now you can see the image a little bit, yeah? This is a landscape. So these are trees. That plain is grass there. So you can kind of see the image a little better, I think, against that surface. There we go. And then, when I'm ready to print, I'm going to grab my ink. Just looking for an open black. So here is what our ink containers look like when they've been used for a while. They're kind of messy. You can just barely make out the brand name. That first letter is an A. This is Akua brand ink. It is soap and water washable. It's water soluble. It's non-toxic. I wouldn't eat it, but it's not going to hurt you. It may be detectable on the screen. It is kind of runny. You can kind of see it moving a little bit in there. It has the consistency, it's a little bit runnier than honey. So it's not drippy wet like a soda, but if I dip this piece of cardstock or mat board in there and hold it up, you can see it dripping off the end maybe. What we're doing is putting a few blobs of ink on the plate just to get us going. And then when I go to squeegee the ink across here, I want to make sure and hold the piece of mat board rectangle as close to 90 degrees to the surface as possible. If I hold it on an angle like this, it's just going to smear everywhere. You can see it just leaves a big black mark. But if I hold it straight up and down and scrape it, you can kind of see that the ink is going down into my grooves, but it's wiping off slightly on the areas that are meant to be white. This particular image has a lot of marks over the whole surface. It's going to take me a quick second here to get the ink distributed. Yep. Mm-hmm. And this is why I've got that newsprint underneath here, is because you're going to run off the edges, and it is kind of messy. So if you've got excess ink you want to wipe off, you can do that. Maybe a little light on that edge. There we go. So there is now ink everywhere on there. I'm then going to use what we call tarlatan, which is really basically just cheesecloth. So here's a piece that's been used a little bit already. You can see it has some stain on it. These can be rinsed and reused a bunch of times, so don't be afraid to rinse and reuse. I'm going to use this, though, as the kind of a two-part system. I'm going to use this as the interior piece. I'm going to take a little piece of newsprint, crumple it up, put it inside of one piece of tarlatan, and just kind of make it into a little ball. So now that's like the core. And I'm going to take this bigger piece and wrap it around the outside. And if you look at it now, it's curved in a lot of directions. So what I always do with mine before I start wiping is bang it on the table a couple times so I get a flatter surface. Then I start usually in the middle, circular motions, and work my way out. You can almost start to see the image. Now I've got a lot of ink on the tarlatan, so I can just take that outer piece off, move it slightly, wrap it back on again, and I've got a now clean spot to work from. So it usually takes me about 3 wipes across the whole surface to get it where I want it to be. I think you can see it a little more clearly now. I'm going to reposition for my 3rd wipe. There we go. There's a fair amount of light value in the foreground here in my grass, but I also have some white spaces in between leaves and the trees. And as I get those lighter areas wiped, you can see the image just a little more clearly each time. All right, now, it still has what we call plate tone on it. If you look at this area right here, there's an area where there's some shadow on the grass on this line and right here, but in between, that area is meant to be essentially white. So I can either leave that little bit of ink that's still clinging there, or I can wipe it off. Now, some people don't like doing this, but you can do what they call a palm wipe. You can use your own hand. And notice that it's getting ink on my palm, right? But I'm getting excess ink off. Now, a lot of people don't like that because you're going to get super messy. So instead of that, you can do a finger wipe with some newsprint. Do not use paper towel, because paper towel will shred. Remember, all those lines have little bits of plastic sticking up, so if you take a paper towel to it, it's going to just leave little bits of shredded paper everywhere. So here we are using newsprint to just do a little cleanup, just to take the excess ink off of my lightest areas. Definitely want to do that in the sky. I'm going to leave a fair amount of ink, though, as plate tone in between these clumps of leaves to give it just a little painterly effect. All right, so now I should be okay to go ahead to my next step. So I'm going to try to position this a different way so you guys can see the printing press. All right. Before I touch it, I want to get ink off my hands. This particular soap that we have here, Marvelous Mary Ann's, is really good for oil-based anything, so oil paint is great for that. If you get ink or paint of any kind on your skin or on your clothes, especially if it's oil-based, this will help get it out. If you get to it before it sits on there too long, right?
Can we buy that in stores, or is it something that?
I ordered it through Dick Blick, and they have it in all different sizes, so you can get smaller containers. I don't know that anybody carries it locally. You know, we only have the big chain stores, but and I haven't seen it there.
Would you know if they have surface on or anything like that?
Yeah, that they definitely do. And again, you're probably, if you head to Michael's, you probably play a little less than Hobby Lobby.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think if I scooch this, the press is really quite heavy. But if I do this, it is meant to roll on those wheels on the front side. So you can kind of see, I think, on the screen, but you guys can definitely see. This print press operates a little differently from the traditional ones. The traditional ones have the roller in the very middle, and it's the table that moves. With this guy, the table stays in place, and the roller housing is what moves across the whole thing. So when you're setting the pressure, first you want to make sure your blankets are nice and straight. When you set the pressure, do it at one end, either the head or the foot, as opposed to setting it in the middle. What I always try to do is raise it up as high as it'll go. So left is loose, right is tight. If you go to the left as far as it'll go, it'll raise the whole mechanism upward. So, and this looks silly, but what I usually do is try to zone out. If I look at my hands while I'm doing this, I will start turning one hand faster than the other. So I try to pick a point in space and just try to keep my hands moving relatively at the same pace. Right about there, it starts to tighten up for me. Now I've used this press for a long time, so I kind of know what I feel, but you'll notice it too as you're winding it down. It'll suddenly start to resist you a little bit. It won't move as quickly as you're turning it. So if you look here, there are two guides. This guide on this side here is the one we want to look at first. This tells you your height. And that's the height of the roller off of the press bed. So because we've got these blankets on there, it's not going to go all the way down to 0. But we should be about 3 little marks up from the bottom. And we are. That's about 3/16 of an inch. It's a teeny tiny height. There's a mark on both sides. I just want to double check this side. We are even. The same handles that did the height will do the pressure. For your dry point pressure, I would be in the neighborhood of that line right there that has a number 4. The press has 5 settings. The top of the chart is 5. There's not a 5 there, but you can go above this 4. 4 is ideal for what we're doing. So again, left is loose, right is tight. If I wind one at a time, you can see that little plate is going up. Oh, my glasses are going on. Until it lines up with the number 4. Do the same thing on this side. And we should have even pressure. This housing in the middle is designed to equalize the pressure if you don't get it completely right. It's better if you double check, but don't stress about it. It should even out by itself. The next thing you want to do is pull the press blankets back. So now you've got a working surface. Your plate could go right on this plexiglass, but there's multiple people using the room at any one time. And your plate is going to have ink on it, on the back. It's inevitable. So if I put my plate on there right now, ink from the back of it is going to get on the press. So I always put a piece of newsprint on there just to help contain my mess. The plate is going to go on ink side up. And you want to make sure that it's not on a funny angle. I would try to keep it parallel in one direction to your roller housing. That's pretty good. All right. Before we can print, though, we have to make sure that our paper is flexible. So to do that, we soak the paper in water, which is why I was running water in the tub there in the back. I'm going to see if I can grab a scratch piece of paper from the storage room. scratch pieces are a little bit too small, so I'm going to go ahead and move on to a new piece of paper. When we use the printing press for Italia, we're going to use this really nice quality paper. I have a feel of how thick that is. It's not point watercolor paper. It almost is, right? It's much thicker than drawing paper. And also you notice on the outer edges, you see how it waves in and out? There's a decal to it. So in order that the paper doesn't look weird, if you cut it with scissors, it would probably look a little funny right now, because you have one side that was ripply and one side that was straight. So what we normally do is we use a ruler to tear the paper. So if I go over there, I should be able to do that. And that plate that we're printing from is 9 by 12. So I want to make sure that my paper is bigger than 9 by 12. We want to have a little bit of a margin. So if I've got a 9 by 12, and I add 2 inches to the top and 2 to the bottom, if I cut this to be 11 by 14, then I should have a piece that will give me a nice 1-inch margin. So I'm going to mark the paper along the edge at the 11 mark. Notice when I'm measuring, I don't have the ruler in the middle because you can get it on a funny angle, and then it won't line up properly. So whenever you're measuring, try to line the paper up with the edge. There's the 11 mark. Now, you do not need to take the pencil and draw that line. In fact, you're going to use the ruler itself to tear the paper. So as long as it's in the right position, you're going to clamp it down with one hand, putting some pressure there. Grab the loose end, and loosely, short, little movements. Move your hand down, short tears. Boom. 2 pieces 11 inches tall. Now they're massively long. The sheet of paper that I just took out is 22 inches by 30. So we want to cut this down again. We want this to be 14 inches. Put that in place. So short, sharp jerks. So these are the ones that are size. You could use scissors, obviously, but if you notice the part where I tore it now has that kind of roughly edge. So we usually tear the paper. It's faster, it's easier. You don't have to go in and put the mark with pencil and then come behind it with scissors. It takes forever. But what we do have to do is make sure the paper is soaked. So this big tub over here by the sink, the paper just goes right in there to soak. The trick is you want to make sure that you don't just put it straight flat on top of the water. You want to break the surface of the water so the paper is going to float back up, but you want to make sure it gets underneath the surface. The paper will sit in there for 15, maybe 20 minutes. The paper's nice and thick, so it's going to be okay if you leave it even for an hour. You could probably even leave it overnight and it wouldn't completely turn to mush. If you're using any other paper that's thinner than that, it will turn to mush in a hot minute, right? So you cannot leave, certainly don't put newsprint in there ever, but the heavier weight drawing paper will sometimes use in a pinch to print on. That will also have to be soaked, but I would not leave that in there for more than like an hour at the most. Now, we can speed ourselves up a little bit though. instead of waiting 20 minutes for this to soak, I can take it out while it's still wringing wet. It's super drippy wet. When you take it out of the water, take it by one corner, like a diamond. So it kind of sheds off the opposite corner. And as gross as it is, wait for the stream to end, and then wait till you hear drips. And I would wait until you can count a couple seconds between drips. So we're almost there. That's pretty good. All right, now, in this state, this paper is still way too wet. So what we would normally do is we would make a sandwich of dry drawing paper, wet printing paper, dry, wet, dry, and then put some weight on it. We don't have a need to sit here and wait for 20 minutes for it to press out the excess moisture. It's flexible, but it's too wet for printing. So in order to get the excess moisture out quickly, you can actually use the press to do that. So I'm just going to temporarily move my printing plate out. And I'm going to just use one piece of drawing paper folded in half. I'm going to put this guy in between. Run the press over that. All right, so what's under the blanket right now is a piece of drawing paper folded in half with our wet printing paper in between it. When you use this printing press, another reason I like for people to start with it is because it has what we call a captain's wheel. It's a circle all the way around, as opposed to that one, which is called a star wheel. You notice it just has spikes sticking out. You're smart, you're geniuses probably, but I have seen grown adult professional printmakers grab hold of a star wheel and turn it and then lean into it and smack themselves in the back of the head with the next piece. You can't with this one. So I always like for people to practice on this guy first. But you turn the wheel in the direction that you want the roller housing to go. It's going to go across and squeeze out that excess moisture. You can see how much water got absorbed into this sheet. So this is now ready to print with. Let's grab our newsprint again. Come on. Get this guy in position. Now I'm taking my damp paper and putting it on top of the plate. Once you set it down, don't try to move it around, because there's ink on there. If it starts to print at all just from contact, it's going to smear everything. So just lay it as best you can. Drop your blankets. We want to make sure there isn't a big fold in there. You don't have to be obsessive about this as long as it's not like that. You should be okay, but generally flat. These blankets have all kinds of inky fingerprints all over them from people not washing before they get on this part. So try to avoid that. But now we're ready to print. We're going to go back across. And when I hit the plate, like right there, I just came up on it, I can feel that it's tighter. It's taking more energy on my part to run the press. I don't know if you could hear that. When it came off, there was a little bit of a thunk sound. Just go across once, don't go back and forth. Stop when you hit the end. If I keep going, it's going to just keep turning and it'll screw up the blankets. So just wait till you hear that kind of clicking sound. Blankets over the top, and then Oh, nice. Yeah. So obviously we just did a handful of marks. But I mean, that looks to me a lot like a pen and ink drawing, right? So if you look close, let me see if I can get it on the screen. That might be easier. Okay, where are you? There we go. Okay. So there's a fair amount of detail in there, but if you look close, you can probably just barely see right in here where it's sort of lightly grayish. That's better. Right in this portion right here, it's a little darker than the paper right outside the margin. Can you see that? Okay, so that's an area where there's still a little bit of ink clinging to the surface. So we call that plate tone. Now I can control that or I can let it go. So bad wiping would be if you could see lots of big drag marks, right? This I would say is actually pretty good because it looks like a natural value in that space. I'm trying to find you another area. Like I didn't go crazy wiping in here. So there's a lot of patch lines, but it's actually reading a little darker than the lines themselves because I didn't wipe excessively in that spot. I tried to be cleaner with the sky, but if you get really close to it right there, let's see if the zoom will let us do that. There we go. You can definitely see right here, there's some ink that actually is outside of the marks that I made. So I maybe could have wiped a little better here in the sky. That being said, I kind of love how that looks. I don't think it's that bad, you know? So what we're looking to do ultimately is to make sure that your editions, the prints that you're making, look reasonably identical to one another as you go through the printing process. So that's sort of the whole thing in a nutshell. Get your image, either as a drawing or a photograph, get your plexiglass, get your Drypoint tool, do your hatching and cross-hatching, and then when we're ready, we'll ink and print. I doubt anybody's going to whip out a full piece today, but we will be able to take the tools home. I don't see any reason why you can't take your plexiglass, your design, and the Drypoint needle with you, right? So you could be doing all your scratching and stuff at home. When we get back together on Monday of next week, we might just jump right in and do it. The only thing I want to show you, though, relative to prepping the plate, is we want to make sure that there's a bevel to the edge. The plexiglass scrap that I was working on with my shell you can see is really pretty thick. It's definitely thicker than the pieces that you guys bought, which are more like this thickness. If I put those together, can you see that? Mine's a Mondo one, right? Now it'll still work, but it's really bigger than we need it to be. But it's good for the demo part because I can then show you how to use this guy. This is your plumber's deburring tool. It is literally designed for use in fitting pipes. So if I put something white behind it, maybe you can see it better. Can you see how the tip of it is curved and it has like a little ball on the end? And it actually spins 360 degrees. So the idea of this is that if you were trying to put two pieces of cut pipe together, and you'd cut the pipes to fit, there would be a little burr of metal that would prevent them from going into each other. So you would take this guy and you would run it around the inside of the pipe and cut the burr off. So printmakers saw this. I'm sure somebody was having their pipes cleaned or something, and they were like, wait a minute, we could use that. You're going to take it, let's see if I can do this. There we go. Right off the edge of the table, and I'm hooking it so that the little ball at the end, if I get really close up to the camera, there's a little ball right at the end. So I'm trying to hook it right on the edge of that ball, and then I'm holding it at about a 45-degree angle, and I'm pulling it toward myself. And as I do that, it's scraping down. There we go. Can you see those little curlicue things? It's making a 45-degree angle plane on that side. Yours will not make that horrible sound because it's not as thick as this. And this was cut really roughly with a saw, so that's why it's kind of jittering in and out. Yours will be much smoother. Let me try one. This has already been beveled, but here's one that's the thickness y'all have. And if I do a little beveling on here, it's going to be nice and smooth. So the reason for doing that is because the roller mechanism has to go across the press, and then it has to climb up onto your plate, across the plate, and then down again. So if it goes up against something as thick as that one I was using before, it's a nice big flat shape, the roller's going to hit that and not be able to go up. It might do it and then finally force itself to go up, in which case it would probably cut my paper at least, if not the paper and the blankets. So beveling is really important. You could bevel beforehand if you want to do that first thing today, just to get used to doing it. You could bevel it after the image is done. That's fine too. But basically, that's the whole setup. Once your plate has beveled edges, whether you do that first or last, and you have the image incised in there with your Drypoint needle, as soon as that step is done, we can start pulling proofs. So the paper I printed on earlier is the good quality paper for the edition. To do proofs, we usually use a cheaper quality paper, like the 80-pound heavier weight drawing paper, just to test stuff out, see what it looks like. Once it's printing the way we want, we'll go on to your good page. Does that make sense to everybody? And I'm sure the quiz to some extent probably helped because you knew sort of what you were getting into, but now you've seen it in action. Anybody have any mega questions about what to do? All right, why don't we go ahead and take a break a little early here. And when we come back, I'll look at the design ideas you have them. If you don't have design ideas, you can start working on that part of it. But assuming you have a design idea, you could be working on making your lines right away. Okay? Great. Take a break.